Welcome. This yin practice will start off with a brief warm-up, and then the first yin posture will be both sides of Sleeping Swan, and then Dragonfly Pose, both sides of a prone twist pose, and then both sides of a prone half frog pose with Sphinx arms, Milky Way Pose, and then for Savasana or resting pose, you can choose to do legs up the wall. The whole practice can be done without any props, but a useful props for a lot of us might be a yoga bolster, if you have one. If you don't have a yoga bolster, then you can make one with seat cushions, couch cushions, pillows, blankets, whatever you might have on hand, even clothes, towels, will all work. The theme for class will be the very center of our home galaxy, the Milky Way Galaxy. There lies a supermassive black hole known as Sagittarius A star. The practice starts by finding a comfortable seat. It can be any kind of seat. I'm sitting cross-legged. I'm also sitting up on this bolster, so you can sit up on as much padding as you would like to make cross-legged feel better. If you're wanting to sit that way, but cross-legged feels a little bit awkward. Otherwise, sit on some other comfortable way where you feel rooted and grounded and stable. Have a little bit of room around your torso. And then spend some time to take your torso, bring your torso to a neutral spine. That means kind of like toning your muscles to feel like you're sitting up straight and tall here. You can roll your shoulders back. And we'll start off practice with a little bit of neck rolling. So go ahead and tuck your chin towards your sternum. And then begin to slowly rock your head from side to side. Maybe slowly rock over to the right side so that your ear is kind of getting closer to your right shoulder. Come back to center and then just slowly roll over to the left. And you're paying attention to how this is feeling. If you have a lot of neck strain, maybe this is almost painful, in which case, be gentle with yourself here. And you can just continue this neck rolling. For some of us, maybe we can roll all the way around. So if you want to, make a whole neck circle with your head. Roll back. And again, you're paying attention to how this is feeling in your head, your neck, your upper shoulders here. And you're noticing any places of tension or strain. Maybe make a couple circles in one direction if you're making complete circles. And again, slow is good because slow means you can really feel the physical sensations of doing this. And then go ahead and go the other direction a couple times. And again, we're not going into the realm of pain, we're just going into the realm of, oh yeah, maybe I'm actually feeling something here in my neck here. And when you get back to center, then pause, and then go ahead and lift your chin back up here. And we'll try some seated cat and cow rolling. So instead of on hands and knees, we'll do the cat and cow rolling just where we're seated here. So if you're seated cross-legged like I am, I like to put my hands on my knees or my thighs just for a little bit more stability. We'll come into a seated cat. That means to round your spine. So we're coming into a forward fold. So I'm trying to round my spine towards the wall behind me. The top of my pelvic bone is tilting back. And then my collarbone is kind of folding forward, head and neck are folding forward. This is seated cat. And then from here, move into seated cow pose, which is a kind of a gentle back bend here. So now I'm tilting my top of my pelvis forward, kind of arching and extending my spine and trying to reach my sternum forward here. Head and neck can stay neutral, or if it's okay with your neck, you can lean your head and your neck back. And then we can continue to move back and forth between these two. Now this should feel familiar in that you're kind of just extending and flexing your spine here. And this can be subtle or exaggerated. You get to make it your own. this is a different variation of the typical cat and cows that we tend to do on all fours, on hands and knees. It will probably feel a little bit different because we're seated instead. And so one idea is to notice that difference here. You can continue with this for a few more breaths, or maybe I will recommend coming into what I call bear rolling. You start to add a lateral bend. So you're actually kind of making circles with your spine. So come into seated cat, and then you kind of laterally bend over to one side and come into seated cow, and then over to the other side. So I'm kind of rolling my whole torso around so that my spine is actually bending forward, backwards, and sideways in lateral bends here. And again, if this is a little bit too hard on your neck, you can keep this as a subtle motion, keep your head and neck kind of neutral. Or when I do this, I'm always kind of moving my head and my neck around. And that might kind of distract from what's going on in my torso here. Change directions. If you're doing the whole roll thing here, go in the opposite direction for a couple of cycles here. And again, adjust your speed here. Maybe I'm going a little bit too slow for you, so maybe you can speed it up here. Otherwise, at some point, if you're doing cat and cows or the rolling, come back to center here. And then come to hands and knees. We'll do a toe squat, and we'll do this in stages to put some pressure on the feet. It's a little bit of yin for the feet. Come to hands and knees. Come into a nice stable tabletop, and then flex your feet so that your toes are flexed and on the floor. And then see how this feels. Maybe for some of us this feels pretty intense, so this is where you stay. You stay with just the feet flexed and feel that intensity in your toes and in the backs of your feet. Some of us, we can press ourselves back. So hips go back towards your heels, and maybe that really increases the intensity in the toes here. You can stay here and just notice that, just like breathe into it here, and just feel that pressure that's in the toes, in the back of the feet here, maybe in the ankles here. Or some of us can just sit up on the toes here. Sometimes my little toe wants to rebel, so I kind of bring it back under here. Now you can just stay here, or if you want to multitask, you can do a little bit of an arm stretch, a shoulder stretch here while you're just marinating in your feet here. So we'll do kind of a half shoulder stretch here. Raise your left arm, bend your left elbow, left hand behind your head and neck here. Bring your right arm up, clasp the left elbow with your right hand, and just gently pull the left elbow over to the right, kind of stretching this whole shoulder area here. So you're just gently stretching this over. And then when you get to a place where you're feeling a little bit of tension and pressure here, maybe you just hold this for a breath or two. And then release and do the other side. So now it's the other arm, bend the elbow, and then reach over, grab the right elbow with the left hand, and then pull the left hand over here till you're feeling a stretch in that right shoulder. And then just stay here again for maybe a breath or two. And then release that arm, shake the arms out. Maybe the toes are really done, so come back to hands and knees, and then you can tap your toes out. And that was the warm-up, so now we'll get into the longer yin postures. And the first one of which is Sleeping Swan Pose. It's the yin version of Pigeon Pose. Already a prop might be useful for this one, but there will also be alternatives. So for Sleeping Swan, I'll get this prop ready here. Come to hands and knees, and then bring your left foot up between your hands. Inch the right knee back, coming into a lunge, and then start walking the left foot over to the right side. Then start lowering your hips in your left knee. You might have to adjust the heel closer to your hip, since this is a hip opener, and we're not trying to create pain or torque in the knee here. Otherwise, if you want to create more intensity in the hips, maybe you walk the heel this way here. But if you don't make it all the way onto the floor, and you're feeling very unstable. This is where a prop, like a bolster, can come in handy. Something big enough and tall enough that you can really sink your hip and your front thigh into, to make this a little bit more stable feeling rather than desperate feeling here. So I'm in Swan right now. For Sleeping Swan, slowly lower your torso. Maybe you stay up on a straight arms. Maybe you get down onto elbows. Maybe you make it all the way to the floor. Find your version of this. This is where we'll stay for about 3 minutes or so. Maybe you don't need a prop, so you can do this without a prop. Maybe you need a little bit more padding. Maybe this doesn't work at all, no matter how you rearrange things for your own edge. Then a good alternative for this is called Eye of the Needle pose. So for that pose, you'll slowly come out of Sleeping Swan. You'll make your way back onto your back. Bend both knees and then bring your left knee in, put your left ankle on your right thigh. Left knee is bent and out wide here. See how this feels. For some people, this might be enough. Here, you're feeling something in your hip, and this is a nice hip opener here. Or then the next stage here is to bring the right leg in, clasp your hands behind the right thigh, or if it's okay with your knee, and you can reach it, maybe in front of your right shin here. And you can just stay here in Eye of the Needle here. Otherwise, if you're marinating in Sleeping Swan, you can just stay here. We'll stay here been here for about 1.5 minutes. So we'll stay here for about another 1.5 minutes. I'll go through, once again, go through the technique of yin practice. So we're trying to emphasize some healthy stress on connective tissue, and that requires quiet muscles, soft muscles, relaxed muscles, and it requires time. So soft muscles and time is the underlying idea behind the 3 ways of practicing a posture. The first one is getting into the posture, finding your shape. And this is generally in yoga called finding your edge. But since we're all diverse and unique, we need to find our edge, that place where we each stop, the place where you stop. And you start to feel resistance, traction, tension, pressure. Just a reasonable amount, not to the point where you're feeling trauma or injury or pain. Just some place where it's like, oh yeah, this is telling me that I'm getting to the end. This is our edge here. Second principle is the principle of stillness. And that means once we have found the shape that's appropriate for us, we stay there. We decide to stay there for a while without jumping in and out of the posture. You can make adjustments. You can go deeper, you can go less deep, move something around to a more accessible position. This is all acceptable. And as time progresses, you'll want to do that here. The final one is time spending a few minutes rather than a few breaths in the posture. Now we've been here in Sleeping Swan or in Eye of the Needle for a few minutes now, so it's time to come out. Maybe come back up into Swan. You can slowly come out of Swan. Maybe you come up into Downward Facing Dog, something yang-like here. Or maybe some other way to just work out the kinks here. Take some time. We'll do the other side of Sleeping Swan, but if there's some kind of movement or reverberation you'd like to do to feel coming out of that side of Swan, then go ahead and do that, and then we'll move into the other side. So if Swan just doesn't work for you, then maybe Eye of the Needle on the other side. Otherwise, come back onto hands and knees, and this time it's the other foot that comes up in between your hands. So it's the right foot, it's the left knee back, and then the right foot inches over to the left side. Lower the right knee and the right hip, and if you're wanting some stability under that hip, then, and if you have a yoga bolster, I'm kind of showing off how you can use a yoga bolster for Swan. You can stuff that yoga bolster. Notice I have this bolster underneath my hip and my thigh here. And that creates a nice stable platform that eases the pressures, both maybe in my knee and my hip here. So it makes it a little bit nicer feeling here. And again, then take your time in folding forward here. Find your version of swan here. And we'll stay here. And again, give yourself permission to do eye of the needle on this side if Sleeping Swan doesn't work for you. Sometimes this pose will work for one side but not the other, and that's okay. So let it be okay if you have to do eye of the needle one side and Sleeping Swan on the other here. This is a good time to check in. Check in with your breath. Notice what it's up to. And the great thing about your breath is whatever it's doing, let it be acceptable. Maybe it's a deep, long breath that you like to call a yogic breath or something. It's like, yes, I'm practicing yoga, it must be deep, long breath. Or maybe it's really erratic and short. You know what, that's okay too, that kind of a breath, because it's your breath. It's how your body was wanting to breathe at the moment. Maybe be okay with it and say, this is fine. Notice it. It's time to notice. Just notice what's going on. Notice the physical sensations. Notice the mental activity. Maybe some emotional overlays onto everything. That's what these yoga practices are for, is to be a little bit gestaltist and to notice all of these things. Notice the swirling of the breath, the swirling of the sensations, the swirling of the mental and the emotional thought processes that are going on. This will come into play later when I talk a little bit more about the theme for class, which is the supermassive black hole called Sagittarius A star at the center of our home galaxy, the Milky Way. Here, it also has a lot of swirling and bubbling and gurgling going on around it. A lot of gas and dust. That see a lot of activity, even though the black hole itself is rather quiet and internal, and you can't really see it. And yet, as of today, as of the day that I'm recording this, we can see it. So about another half a minute on this side of either eye of the needle or Sleeping Swan here. Maybe you need to make an adjustment to your edge. Maybe you need to come out of the posture. Maybe you need to go deeper for these final few breaths. Decide what's optimal for you. And sometimes the advanced practitioner decides less time is better. So one final breath here. And then slowly bring yourself back up. You can come up into downward facing dog, or you can come out, maybe do some cat and cows here. I'm going to suggest my favorite posture after a hip opener like that is this windshield wiper maneuver. So come to seated, legs out in front, knees are bent, feet are on the ground but fairly wide apart. Maybe hands are behind you, rooting into the ground, and then lower both knees to one side, bring them back up to center, lower them to the other side, and then just allow them to kind of bob slowly back and forth. Just kind of loosen up that hip socket so you get a good internal rotation in the inside knee that's bobbing down here. And that's a nice counter maneuver to the external rotation of pigeon pose or eye of the needle here. So the next long held yin posture is called Dragonfly Pose. And again, particularly if you have a lot of tightness in your legs and your back body like I do, sitting up on a little bit of height can make this posture a little bit more accessible, and it allows you to tilt your pelvis forward a bit more. So for Dragonfly, legs are out in front, and then bring the legs away from each other just as far as they go until they stop for you. The legs are extended, they don't have to be straight. The knees can be bent. In fact, the knees can be really bent for some of us if they need to be. Here, you can even put props underneath the knee. Some of us, maybe this doesn't work at all. Maybe this creates just pain. So my suggestion is come into butterfly instead. Butterfly is bend the knees, put the feet together, make butterfly legs rather than dragonfly legs. And you just do this with butterfly, so that's a nice alternative to dragonfly. Otherwise, if you're in dragonfly, next procedure is to just fold forward any amount here. And since this is yin, you're relaxing the muscles in your torso and allowing your spine to round here. You may need additional props. If this feels really unstable to you, maybe you need more things to pile up here to rest your torso on. Or maybe you're someone that is so flexible and has such a large range of motion that you're resting your torso on the ground too here. Or if you're kind of like me, I'm perfectly fine just hanging here in midair. But if that's causing too much pain, you don't have to do that. You can find some props here. Otherwise, settle into this posture. Notice how it feels. Make an adjustment if you've gone too deep and you're experiencing pain here. Or if you're feeling nothing and you're just kind of getting bored because there's no sensation, allow yourself to go a little bit deeper here. And then maybe use your breath, the cadence of your breath, to continue to soften here. And then we'll stay here for a couple more minutes. So our planet, our solar system, is part of a large spiral structured galaxy. You can think of it as a disk with these arms spiraling out of the center. It's made up of roughly 400 billion stars. It's 100,000 light years side to side. We're kind of in the suburbs. In kind of one of the major arms has a little bit of a spur that comes off of it, and we live in that spur. So we're about 27,000 light years from the very center of the galaxy, of this disc-like circular galaxy. And at that center, and we're really in the plane of that disk, at that center, there's a lot of stuff. There's gas, there's dust, there's stars, and there's the center. One of the problems that we fundamentally have about the center of our golden galaxy is we can't see it. We can't see it easily with our own eyes because there's so many stars, there's so much dust, there's so much gas in the way between 27,000 light years of that stuff between us and the center of the galaxy. And so we can't see it very easily at all. We can't see it at all with the naked eye. We have to use scientific instruments that observe in other wavelengths and other bands to get around that. So we can we can look at the center of our galaxy. We can look at the center towards in the direction. And so as the name implies, we're talking about an object that scientists have named Sagittarius A star, and I'll get a little bit into the history of why it got named that. So I'll start off by saying it's in the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. So if you're familiar with the zodiac constellations and you know where they are in the sky, when you look at Sagittarius, you're looking in the direction of the center of the Milky Way, and that's where Sagittarius A star lies. A little bit more about where the name came from. So the history of Sagittarius A star began with the birth of radio astronomy. So maybe just one more breath here. I'll pause here as we come out of Dragonfly. So when you're ready, slowly come out of Dragonfly. Maybe slowly bring yourself up, kind of come back to a nice neutral spine. If there's a lot of achiness in the spine and the torso, maybe a little bit of gentle movement. So maybe some twists, but our next yin postures will actually be twists here. Maybe the legs are achy, so slowly bring the legs in. You can even use your hands and arms to help bring the legs in, and then just some gentle motions with the feet, with the legs, work out some kinks here. Getting ready for the next yin posture, which is a prone twist here. And a bolster can be helpful if you have one. Again, I've seen people do this without a bolster, so if you're trying to do this practice without any props, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes it makes the postures feel a whole lot better if you have a little bit of soft support. Again, pillows and blankets are always a good thing to have around here. So for this prone twist, you want to, if you're using a bolster, you're going to sit with the outside of your right hip against the narrow edge of the bolster. Knees are bent, shins are swept back like this. The particular orientation of your feet, not important here, but your knees are kind of pointed 90 degrees. You're making a right angle to the long edge of the bolster here. And then maybe using your arms, sitting up straight and tall for a moment here. Turn and face the front of your bolster with your upper torso, with your upper chest here. And then slowly work yourself down onto the bolster. You're trying to lay your torso, your chest onto the bolster here, until you get down onto your head here. Now this is where you experiment with your neck and the head. I would suggest try turning to get a complete twist in the spine. Turn your head and your neck away from your knees here. So if the knees are pointed to the left, you turn your head and neck to the right. See how that neck feels about that. And if it doesn't feel so great, that's okay. Just turn your head and your neck in the same direction of your knees. A little bit of experimentation. By the way, you don't have to hold your head and your neck here the whole time. If it gets, no matter what the orientation is, if it gets uncomfortable after a minute or so, give yourself permission to always change your head and your neck. It's the rest of your torso that's kind of marinating in this twist here. Maybe arms are far enough away so that you can really sink your weight into the floor or the prop of the bolster if you're using one. And you can just settle here. And then again, notice your breath. My breath, I really like twists. But twists make my breath kind of short and choppy sometimes, which is really interesting. So on the one hand, I feel relaxed. On the other hand, my breath is kind of doing all sorts of interesting things here. So we'll stay here. We'll stay here for a few minutes. Oh, by the way, this twist might not fit everybody. And so if you're one of those that struggle with twists, you can do a more active twist and hold it for not just as long. So if you're liking this, stay here. If you're wanting an alternative, find a comfortable seat and just do a seated twist. This takes a little bit of muscle engagement, so maybe don't hold this for, maybe just hold this for a minute or so, but you can control how deep you go, and then when you're ready to come out, you can just really come out here of the twist. So that's a good alternative if this prone twist is just a little bit too much. And this twist can get deep if you hold it for a really long time. You can stay here for about 5 minutes if you want to. We'll just stay here for 3, so we're about halfway through this pose. So the idea then is to just really let go and let the floor, let gravity take over. It's kind of the theme for class. We get around to talking about black holes, and black holes are all about gravity here. So allow gravity to win here and just allow yourself to hug the floor here. So back in it was either 1932 or 33. At the very beginnings of radio astronomy, there was one of the first American radio astronomers was a guy by the name of Carl Jansky. And he built a radio receiver to just detect whatever he could find, any kind of radio signal anywhere, be it basically man-made, because this was the era that we were developing radio and radar. But he was also noticing, he was kind of one of the first radio astronomers, because he also noted there was radio signals coming from outer space. And his radio telescope, being the first one, wasn't very sensitive, so it just kind of noticed the major ones out there. And he cataloged them, and there happened to be a major radio source coming from the constellation Sagittarius. So it later got cataloged as Sagittarius A. In other words, the big strong radio signal coming from Sagittarius. This is 1933. And later people also realized that that's probably where the center of the Milky Way Galaxy is. So it was some kind of radio signal coming from the center of the galaxy, and this is where Sagittarius A basically got its name, its first name. The star came later. So one more breath here. And then go ahead, slowly bring yourself up. Give yourself time to be slow and unroll here. Reverberate, get your bearings here for a moment. We'll do the other side of this twist. And so when you're ready, rearrange yourself or your bolster. Maybe you don't have to rearrange either one if you're not using a bolster. I'm rearranging the bolster here. Now it's the opposite, outside of the opposite hip, the left hip, outside of the left hip. Goes up against the narrow end of the bolster. Knees are bent 90 degrees to the length of the bolster, and then turn and face the bolster with the front of your torso. Work your torso down onto the bolster, and then just have that conversation with your head and your neck, which way you want your head and your neck to go here. And then we'll start here. Arms can get rearranged so that they're not taking any weight. They're getting your arms themselves are being supported by the floor. Turns out there's a lot of activity. The center of our galaxy is very busy. A lot of things going on that are emitting radio waves. So what Carl Jansky first noticed was kind of all of that stuff together. His radio telescope wasn't accurate enough or sensitive enough to separate out. Later on, in later years, as radio telescopes got better, they started pinpointing different sources of radio signal coming from Sagittarius. And there was this one very tiny, bright spot. And it was later determined that must be the exact center of the galaxy. And that was really exciting because that's the center. It's also very bright in the radio. It must be something exciting going on there. We don't really know what. So back in the 1980s, it was given the little asterisk, the star. So it was finally formally labeled this area as Sagittarius A star. So that's where it got its name. Other than that, it remained fairly mysterious throughout the decades here. As more sophisticated telescopes and observing techniques came online, we studied this because the center of our galaxy, or our home galaxy, seemed to be a fairly important thing to study. But of course, there was always this problem of too much dust, too much stuff in the wave. And so the only thing that can get through all that dust are radio waves. which is why that's still the primary thing that we use to observe. And turns out high energy, like some high energy radiation can get through too, so we can detect some high energy material like gamma rays and X-rays getting through as well. Just if you look with your own eyes in that direction, and it's really clear outside, all you'll see is the stars and the dust of the spiral arms of the Milky Way that's in front of Sagittarius A star. How about another minute here in this prone twist? Along with all of this naming and understanding, as astronomers studied the universe, they came to understand that there was something supermassive at the centers of most galaxies, not just the Milky Way, but other galaxies too. Sometimes that thing at the very center is very active and created jets, but whatever it was the size of anywhere from a few million to a few billion masses of our own sun. And our own sun is very massive compared to anything we know of. And so we finally figured out, in fact, the Nobel Prize that was awarded a few years ago was awarded to a group of people who finally, beyond a shadow of a doubt, basically could write down and say, okay, there are supermassive black holes at the center of most galaxies. There's stellar black holes. Black holes are kind of a known physical entity here. And that's what we suspect Sagittarius A star to be, is our own personal supermassive black hole at the center of our own home galaxy. One more breath here, and then we'll slowly bring ourselves up and out. So as you bring yourself up, and give yourself time to do a little bit of reverberation, a little bit of moving around to work out the kinks. As you're doing that, I'll explain the next yin posture. The next yin posture, I want to have a name for, so I call it, it's sort of a frog, half frog pose, a prone half frog pose that you can add a back bend to. So get into this pose, make your way onto your belly, both legs extended out front. And then bend your right knee and bring your right thigh up so that it's parallel to your hip, kind of in line with your hip. Right chin is kind of perpendicular here. So this is the prone half frog here. Other leg is still kind of straight here. And then make your way up onto your elbows. Bring your elbows underneath your shoulders, like you would in a Sphinx pose. So for lack of a better name, I call this prone half frog with Sphinx arms pose here. You're in a slight hip opener, and you're in a slight back bend here. So there's a couple of variations to make this more accessible. Maybe the Sphinx arms makes this too intense. So you can just continue to just lay on your belly. Maybe you can put some padding under here. Or maybe it's the half frog leg that's too intense, in which case you can just do Sphinx pose here. So we'll stay here for a couple more minutes or so. So some properties about Sagittarius A star. What astronomers have noticed, they've studied over the years and the decades, is whatever's at the center, they can't see it very well at the very center. They can see a lot of activity around the center. They don't really see much at the center. So the center has always stayed rather mysterious, although we had our suspicions. one thing astronomers did is they studied the stars that orbited very closely around the center. And they noticed that the stars orbited very quickly around the center. Whatever was there had to be very massive. In fact, the mass of the object at the center of our galaxy is 4 million solar masses. So a solar mass is the mass of our own sun. So 4 million times the mass of our sun. The stars and the material are also relatively close to the center. So whatever object lies at the center doesn't take up very much room. In fact, the event horizon, which you could use as a physical size for the black hole, the diameter of the event horizon of the black hole is 17 times the diameter of the sun. Now, for something that's 4 million times more massive than the sun, that's not really that much bigger. That's 1 order of magnitude bigger than the sun. So for something so hugely massive that controls the gravity of the entire galaxy, it's in a relatively small space. This also points to the fact that it must be a black hole, because only black holes are that massive and that small. And that's what we were suspecting too here. So about 5 more breaths on this side of prone half frog here. Maybe notice if you need to make an adjustment or so. So we could observe the stars around this object. And we could observe the gas and dust. In fact, astronomers, researchers calculated that whatever was at the center was actually very, very small relative to the mass that was there. In fact, physicists finally concluded it's like there is only one object that can be so massive and yet so small. And the only object left in the zoo of exotic objects are black holes. So it was suspected. It was suspected for many years. That's what was there here. Slowly come out of half frog. So this is asymmetrical. We have the other side of this to do. So it might be just easy enough to just bring the right leg back and then bend the left knee and bring the left knee out. Again, the angle is up to you here. So since we're all different, you can maybe move the thigh up pretty high or maybe not. Maybe the knee is pretty bent or not so bent. You can also put padding under a knee or maybe under torso here. We're going to stay in Sphinx arms here, unless you're getting tired of Sphinx arms. By the way, those of you with a little bit more supple spines, you can come up into seal here if you want to. Here, it's maybe a little bit too dramatic for me, so I'm kind of fine here in Sphinx. We'll stay here. Another 3 minutes or so on this side. This is part of the practice where you can take a little bit more of a reflective and restorative. So maybe I'll get a little bit off track here, and I'll talk about the tie-in with what does the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way have to do with yoga and yin yoga? Well, a lot of yoga and yin yoga work, a lot of this posture practice and mindfulness that we try to do, it's all internal. You can't see it. It's not superficial and it's not visual. What's going on when you're in one of these postures has more to do with what you're feeling than what it looks like. Same with our galaxy. Our galaxy is influenced by this critical center object that we're trying to get a handle on. It's supermassive, super heavy, and therefore it influences the motion and even the fate of our entire galaxy, of which we are a part of. So we kind of owe our existence to the Milky Way Galaxy and to the major components of the Milky Way Galaxy. And yet, one of the major components, the very center, the very core, is something that is not superficially seen. We have to really work hard at designing observational equipment and procedures to see it. Much like in a yoga practice, if we're trying to find something that's really deeply internal, we really have to pay attention to it for a long time before we really get to know it. This is one of the points as to why we get down into a posture and see how our body feels when we're in that particular shape. We're trying to get to know something that we cannot see. Just like Sagittarius, we're trying to get to know something that if we look in the direction of Sagittarius, we just can't see anything there with our naked eye. But if we study it, which astronomers have done for years, we can start to see through all the superficial stuff, the stars and the gas that are in the way, and we can see to the very center of the Milky Way, just like we can feel to the very center and deeply into our own beings by just spending some time and with our beings, our bodies here, and getting to know the sensations and trying to put aside what it just looks like on the outside, because those who've practiced yoga long enough realize that what it looks like on the outside has nothing to do with what's actually going on the inside here. One more breath, and then slowly bring yourself out of this pose here. You can do a little bit of counter work here. The next posture will be Milky Way Pose, which is a supported bridge pose. And for that, you'll need a prop of some kind. I'm going to suggest, since I've been working with a bolster this whole practice, we'll continue with this theme of the bolster, even though in other videos, you've probably seen me use blocks. So you can use a bolster or blocks or books for this supported bridge. So with the bolster, I'll just lie back with my low back, kind of my low back and my glutes on the bolster here. And if you're using blocks, maybe the blocks underneath, a little bit higher than your glutes underneath your low back, underneath the flat, bony part of your pelvic bone, your kind of your sacrum there. Here. Knees can be bent, but if it's okay, if the pressure's okay, you can let your legs be straight, kind of getting stretched through the fascia and the psoas muscles here. Head and neck are comfortable, and then so you're in this graceful arc. This is why I call this Milky Way pose, because if we look at the Milky Way, our own home galaxy, we're inside of it, so we can't see it as the complete disc-like spiral galaxy. All we can see is the arm of the spiral tracing across the sky in this gentle arc. In fact, that's all we can see when we look at the center of the galaxy. Is when we look at Sagittarius. Again, this is some place that's clear and dark enough that you can actually see the Milky Way band. All you're going to see in Sagittarius is, well, it's pretty spectacular. There's a lot of dark dust lanes and bright stars there. Very beautiful. But there's no way to directly see what's actually at the center. We're going to stay here in this pose for a couple more minutes or so. So once you've found what fits you, you can just stay here. Oh, by the way, if this supported bridge pose doesn't work for you, you can always do a round of Sphinx pose. You can come onto your belly, just do Sphinx as an alternative if you like Sphinx, but you don't like this supported bridge. I've named this pose Milky Way, and so in honor of the center, the core, the supermassive black hole that resides at the center of the Milky Way, then this is for that. as of today, there was an official announcement, today being when I recorded this video, that a coalition of radio telescopes, of institutions and of people, recorded a direct image of the shadow of the black hole at the center of our own galaxy. They made a direct image of Sagittarius A star. The coalition is known as the Event Horizon Telescope, and they use a bunch of millimeter radio telescopes scattered across the Earth to synthesize a radio telescope the size of the Earth, to get the resolution, to actually see the black hole directly. Some of the telescopes are in very interesting places. There's one telescope in clear down in Antarctica near the South Pole. There's another telescope in Hawaii. There's a major telescope called ALMA that's in the Atacama Desert in the Andes Mountains in Chile in South America. And then there's a few telescopes in the United States and over in Europe, and I think there's one in Mexico. There's eight telescopes in all, and they combine together. It's a huge project in that each telescope observes individually, and then the data is combined to create the detail and the sensitivity of a giant telescope the size of the entire Earth. This gives them the ability to see into the very center. And what has happened is, for the first time in history, we have made a direct image of the black hole, in that it looks like a donut. There's a ring of light around the hole, but the center of the black hole is dark. The center of our galaxy is dark because of the light having a hard time escaping the gravitational pull of the black hole. This is why they're called black holes, is light. The gravity is so strong that even light cannot escape them. Even though there's a lot of light being generated right around the black hole, the middle of the black hole is dark. And indeed, that's what we see. So this confirms what we suspected this whole time. One more breath here. And then we'll come out. So bend your knees, put your feet back onto the floor. And then maybe lift up your hips just high enough, using your feet and your shoulders to press into the floor. Maybe use your hands to remove the bolster, and then bring yourself all the way back down onto the floor here. And then draw your knees into your chest, give your knees a hug. Maybe do this slowly, because this creates a slight forward fold in your spine, and that can feel dramatic after all the back bending that we've been doing here. And then before our final resting pose, for maybe a final integration, we'll try happy baby pose. So bring your knees out on either side of your torso, interweave your arms in between your knees, find your shins, your ankles, or the bottoms of your feet with your hands, and then try to point your feet up towards the bottoms of your feet up towards the ceiling. And then use your hands and arms to kind of gently tug and pull down on the feet, the shins and the knees, to ease as close to the ground as you go. You can stay here in stillness, or sometimes it's nice to gently just rock back and forth here. Do this for a couple more breaths. Or there's other things that you would like to do to work out the kinks. Any other kind of movements, motions, or postures. And you can do those now. And then we'll settle into a resting pose here. Any resting pose, if you have one that you're really wanting to do, then go ahead and do that one. I'm going to suggest legs up the wall pose here. And you don't have to use a bolster, but you can also put padding. I'm going to use a bolster to put underneath my hips for legs up the wall here. Maybe just a blanket might feel nice. I'm going to have a pillow nearby. to put underneath my head here. So getting into legs up the wall is the hardest part of legs up the wall. So you want to sit sideways next to the wall, and then you want to spin your hips and your legs up the wall. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries. And then legs extended up. Again, I'm using a little bit of height underneath my hips. This might feel better to you, or maybe no height feels better. Maybe some softness under your torso feels good. And maybe you'd like to use a pillow underneath your head here. So this is where we'll kind of finish off practice here. So wiggle around, maybe experiment with props. If you get chilly, you can put on extra blankets or clothing here. This last posture really is the ultimate yin and restorative posture. So comfort is actually important here. Comfort helps create a sense of stability and of quiet and of peacefulness. This gives you, and give yourself time here now. So maybe start to release any unnecessary tension. Maybe some tension is necessary, but maybe there's some tension that's not necessary, and you can release it. I like to start with my head and my face. I'm a thinker, and so I tend to, all the swirling, gurgling, bubbling thoughts often create real brain tension, which translates into the holding of muscles in my own face. And I think this is not uncommon for a lot of people. So you can also start there. You can notice if there's any tightness in your jaw or your face here, and see if you can give yourself permission to soften it. So soften your tongue, soften the inside of your mouth, soften your lips, the skin around the outside of your mouth, soften your cheeks. Continue this idea of softening the face so that your nose be soft. Let the skin around your ears be soft. Release the muscles that ring your eyes. So the muscles in your eye sockets, your left eye, your right eye, let that be soft. And then the space in between your eyes and your forehead, the temples on either side of your forehead. Soften that very, very tip of your head here. Muscles are soft, face is soft, relaxed, released. Soften your brain. Notice your thoughts, your emotions. They might still be swirling, just like the gas and material swirling around the black hole, but the black hole itself, this very deeply internal entity, is actually peaceful, even though the environment around it might be dancing, might be very dynamic. You can think of that as the random nature of the thoughts and emotions here. Just let the thoughts and emotions be. Let them kind of flow and dance around this center, this quiet center, this core, this quiescence. Maybe continue to soften through the rest of your body. So torso is soft, backside of your torso soft, collarbones, rib cage, abdomen released, arms are soft, hands, fingers released. Maybe take a moment to notice the fingertips. Soften down through your hips, up through your thighs, your knees, calves and shins, ankles, heels, tops and bottoms of your feet, all of your toes here. And allow yourself some peacefulness. Notice, pay attention to that deep center, that deep core that is your being. Turns out the deep center, the deep core, our own home galaxy, is also rather peaceful in and of itself, especially compared to other cores of other galaxies. Right now we live in a special age in that core of our galaxy is, relatively speaking, quiet and peaceful. Maybe we can use that quiescence as a bit of inspiration for a bit of softness and peace in our own being here. At some point, begin to deepen your breath. Bring yourself back. Start to make little motions, maybe wiggle toes, wiggle fingers, move feet, move hands. Bring gentle motion back into the rest of your being. If you're practicing legs up the wall, slowly begin to bend your knees. Place the bottoms of your feet against the wall. You can even maybe push yourself away a centimeter or so from the wall. If you're practicing Savasana or some other pose, bend your knees, draw them into your torso, and then very gently roll over onto one side with control. When you get there, stay there for a moment. Recenter. And then cultivate some deep gratitude for your practice and your efforts, but also some deep gratitude for you, your unique embodiment in this universe, this galaxy. The universe and Sagittarius, a star, is ecstatically joyful that you're here. And then when you're ready, slowly bring yourself up to a comfortable, stable seat. Once there, bring your hands together in front of heart center. So allow in, practice with an Om. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.